Okay, welcome to the first lecture of this course. And this lecture is going to be more of an introductory lecture, if you will, a mini lecture. That's because it's going to be shorter in length than future upcoming lecture material in this class. And it's going to cover some general observations and reflections on the place of race, the centrality of race in contemporary American life. Now, as I'm sure you're aware of, and this is especially true in the last decade or so, issue of race has moved front and center in social and political discourse and discussion. I'm sure we're aware, for example, of George Floyd's murder a few years ago, and sort of a flashpoint, if you will, in contemporary civil rights struggle, right? And we also saw the emergence of BLM, or Black Lives Matter, sort of a modern civil rights movement, and other issues, for example, immigration and issues related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which includes race, of course. So this focus on race as a socio-political issue has wielded significant impacts on contemporary society, certainly policy. For example, this college course is a study of race and ethnicity, as you know, and you're likely aware of the fact that a course like this, that is to say a study of race and ethnicity, is now a prerequisite for graduation in California as well as other states. And in fact, in high school, it's going to be mandatory to take ethics studies classes. But for some groups in America, well, they don't agree with this. You may be aware of the controversy of so-called critical race theory, quote unquote, and how its critics are very vocal in their criticism and even condemnation of teaching race and, history that's based on race. They basically do not want that to be taught in the classroom. Why do they say this? Well, they feel that a class like this serves to divide us as a country rather than unite us. And their attitude is same towards, let's say, Black Lives Matter, for example. Many paint that in a negative light. Okay, they're sometimes seen by more extremists on, let's say, the right of the political spectrum as, quote, domestic terrorists, unquote, right? Rather than a, if you will, respectable civil rights group. Another example of this is the term woke that you may have heard of. And there's a tendency on the right that grows stronger and stronger with each passing year that sees this term, generally speaking, as a derogatory term, right? And this is despite its origins as a positive term on the political left, suggestive of being awakened or enlightened, right? Hence woke, to issues related to race, but also, gender and social class and so forth. Okay, and like I just mentioned earlier, the immigration issues that are part of contemporary political life obviously intersects, not always, but oftentimes intersects heavily with race. Now, it's important to note this. Race, as a matter of fact, has always been a hot button issue in the United States. It didn't just, emerge suddenly in the last 10 or so years. It's been a major issue, if not an explosive issue in U.S. history. And, well, if you weren't aware of this, you will realize it by the end of this course. Okay. And in any case, I'm glad that students are enrolled in this class to learn about it, ethnic histories and contemporary issues involving race and ethnicity, the struggles achievements, activism, and indeed contributions to U.S. society and so forth. So, we know, and it's obviously the case, that this course centralizes race and ethnicities as its focal point, right? So what I want to do is make sure we're on the same page here by asking some few basic questions, such as, what is race? What is ethnicity? What is the difference between the two? What does race involve in terms of, a conceptual understanding of race, as opposed to, again, ethnicity? Okay, so it takes us to this slide here. And first we'll talk about race here, and then we'll contrast it with ethnicity. Well, basically, race is just one way out of a host of approaches to classify people, right? It's one way to categorize, to classify human beings, people. It's a type of categorization to differentiate and, again, classify all the different people throughout the world, right? So, again, a project of categorization. And when you think about it, putting aside race for a while, human beings in general, people have this innate tendency to categorize, to classify, indeed, the various entities that exist in the world. And why do we have this inherent or innate cognitive inclination, right? It's in order to understand the external world, right? For example, think of science. Science is big on classifying, right? You have categories and subcategories. For example, in chemistry, the periodic table, that's a form of classification, right? You categorize the various elements, right? And there's a logic undergirding this as to why they belong into a particular category, right? Or other, let's say, living organisms. You're familiar with, kingdom and phyla and order and genus and species and all the others, right? These are categories that become subcategories. And human beings, of course, are Homo sapiens as opposed to other living entities, right? So my whole point here is human beings have this inclination, right? This will to categorize, and it's largely due to our attempt to understand the outside world. Okay, so when you think about race is just one way out of a multitude of ways to categorize, all right? And when we involve, people, when we're involved in this project of categorization, oftentimes it's culturally specific. That is to say, it makes sense, makes complete sense within one, culture or one society, and it may not make that much sense if you introduce this categorization to a different society. For example, I'm thinking about science, and as we're discussing living organisms, well, think about a mammal, right? A mammal, well, I could say this, what is the commonality between a whale and, let's say, a mouse, right? They seem completely different from each other, but I'm sure you're thinking right now, right? Well, the commonality we have, according to science, biology, is that they belong to the category of mammals, right? So it makes sense. Again, there's that logic undergirding it, right? Mammals are, organisms that, that have mammary glands, for the young and so forth, right? All the other features or characteristics that define mammals, quote unquote. Okay, now if you try to introduce that way, or if you just went to another society, and let's say in pre-modern Amazon tribe, right, that wasn't schooled in Western science, and you said, hey, did you know a whale and a mouse belong to the same category? They would, scratch their head and say, how does this belong to each other, right? How do they belong to the same category, right? Speaking of categories that are culturally specific, Amazonian tribes have numerous ways that they categorize different types of leaves in the jungle. And to us, we would scratch our head and just go, I can't see how this leaf is different from those leaves, right? Or you may have heard this, that Eskimos, right, the Inuit tribes in the northern climate, well, they have different ways to categorize snow that, again, would leave us baffled. All right. So I'm just trying to highlight the way that categorization involves the sort of internal logic that makes sense to some people but doesn't make sense to other people, right? Okay, but returning to race, not unlike science, the project of classifying science, race is something we don't really think too deeply about it, because by now, and I mean, the 21st century, it seems to be a, quote, natural way to categorize people, right? Natural. So when we think about race, what is natural about it, quote unquote? Well, it emphasizes physical features, right? Especially skin color. So when you think about race, you think about, let's say, brown skin, black skin, white skin, red skin, yellow skin, right? And not only skin color, but also other features like the shape of the eye. Persons of Asian descent tend to have smaller eyes. Let's say in northern parts of Europe, you tend to see blonde hair, blue eyes, green eyes, and so forth, right? Hair texture, right? African Americans and specific type of hair texture that many of them have. Okay, so it involves physical features, right? And in this sense, race as a way to categorize is physical. And perhaps we could even use the word biological, right? And what's mostly foregrounded, what's mostly prioritized is really skin color. Now, again, I posed this question earlier, right? Think about this. There's a multitude of ways that you could classify different people in this world. You could classify them according to gender, right? Or income level, right? Mundane things like professions, educational level, or by other physical characteristics like height, or even, what month you were born in, right? Or your zodiac sign, for that matter, right? You could classify people according to any of those aforementioned categories, but the thing with race is that what's foregrounded, right? What is emphasized is skin color. Okay, that is foremost when you categorize, right? And it's important to note this, that race began precisely as a project to classify based on physical distinctions. Centuries ago this happened, and it evolved to include non-physical characteristics. Okay, so this is going to lead us to the next video.